Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. Summer is here. It is in full force and effect. Got a lot of exciting stuff coming up here, and I just am very, very curious to hear your thoughts on a black metal classic going back now almost 26 years. But before we talk about some Emperor, Chris, my friend, how are you doing?
Doing good. Looking forward to discussing this album with you because I have a lot of questions. So
I don't see you wearing corpse paint, so I'm a little disappointed. I'm going to put that out there up front. I'm assuming it didn't grab you as much as maybe the Dissection album did, over a year ago now. But we'll get to that and more.
If I had black and white face paint around, I'd sooner dress up as one of the members of Kiss or possibly Demolition. So
I like it. I do. I've got. Not only do I want to hear what you have to say, not only do I want to answer your questions, but I've got questions aplenty for you this week. But before we get there, I know that you've been listening to some other stuff too. What have you been checking out recently?
I've been doing a little bit better, catching up on some of the stuff that's come out so far this year. Let's see, going down the list here. I recently listened to, I won't mention everything, but I'll just point out some of the stuff that I really liked. I finally got to listen to the entire Dark Side of the Moon. No, not the Pink Floyd album, but the band, The Dark Side of the Moon. Their album, Metamorphosis, has Melissa Bonney on vocals. We'll be mentioning her again before the end of this episode. But I enjoyed this a lot. It was kind of like, it reminded me of a more symphonic ad infinitum with less screaminess to it. It was just kind of just a really enjoyable and easy listen. And I mentioned it, the track came out at least a year ago, but every time I hear it, I just get a kick out of it. But the May It Be duet with Charlotte Wessels, their two voices together are so cool. And that's just a really enjoyable tune. So that was one that I finally got a chance to listen to.
A lot of covers on that. I was surprised. I guess when it came out, I didn't realize that it was really, in many ways, a tribute to a lot of other things. But
yeah, I think it's a lot of like fantasy stuff. Like I think there's some like I don't know if there's like Lord of the Rings connections or I don't know if there's any Harry Potter.
Yeah, there's a Harry Potter track. I got to be honest, my daughter is reading the books, and I was in the car and I had the album on, and she's like, "This is from Harry Potter," and I didn't even realize because I read the books. I didn't watch all the movies, and she's like freaking out. And I'm like, I don't even understand what's happening right now. But she picked up on it right away. So they must have been a nice tribute. And there's other fantasy movies in there as well, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's really just a really cool, easy listen. I enjoyed that a lot. I also listened to Against Myself's Tides of Insanity album that came out in May. I enjoyed that quite a bit. Just really solid symphonic metal with a female vocalist. Really good stuff. I like that one. I also listened to the new Burning Witches album, The Dark Tower, today, and man, I gotta say, on the tip of my tongue, you know what? I had her name in my head literally all day today, and now that we're talking, I'm forgetting it. So I will look it up really quick, so not to do. Oh yes, Laura Goldemond. She's the lead singer for Burning Witches. She's like, to me, the second coming of Doro Pesh. Like her vocals are so they're so good, like that raspy, just ass kicking kind of vocal. The band itself, I think, is solid. Like nothing really blows me away, but it's just a really enjoyable, like traditional heavy metal style album with really killer vocals and two great covers at the end, Shot in the Dark, which is one of my favorite Ozzy songs, and a song that I would not know if it were not for this podcast, I Want to Be Somebody by Wasp. So when it came on, I was like, why do I know this song? And sure enough, that was why. So
go back into the archives. You can listen to the original, but that is pretty funny. I remember listening to that album. It didn't really grab me, but I found it to be just a very easy listen. Like it was not wasn't abrasive. It was just, something that you could easily put on and not really think twice.
Yeah, I just find I've always liked them just as like a really solid, just a solid band, and I'd love to see them live sometime. They do tour quite a bit, and they have played in Rochester, and I just have not had a chance to see them. I think last year they toured with the Iron Maidens, so 2 all female bands touring together, which I think is really cool. And I guess one other album I'll mention is I listened to Jason Bieler and the Baron von Bielski Orchestra, their new album, or his new album, whatever you want to call it, Postcards from the Asylum. And this was like just surprisingly enjoyable for me, just because it's like, it's all over the place. There's so many different like styles in here. I can't remember if I had mentioned it before, because I think this was the second time I listened to it, but I didn't really give the first album as much of a listen as I probably should have. But I really thought this was kind of a fun album and a really enjoyable listen. So, I still have a bit more to get through. I've heard the new Foo Fighters album, and I've heard the RN Supersonic Revolution album, like in the background while talking and stuff. So I didn't really get to listen to them as deeply as I'd like to. So still a bit more to get through, but I'm making my way through. And that was some of the stuff that stuck out. I will say the new Elven King album was a bit disappointing. I just thought it was rather forgettable, and I was expecting more. I listened to it twice now, and I was just kind of meh on it. I'm curious what other people think, but I don't recall seeing anybody really say anything good or bad about it.
It was almost like they had to come out with something, so they just kind of threw something down. It seemed a little uninspired compared to some of their older material, at least for me. I had a similar experience with the new Fifth Angel album. They've completely changed direction, and they've gone like straight up power metal. And I remember raving on the podcast about their first single, which I just thought was a phenomenal song. Unfortunately, I don't think the rest of the album really led up or kind of met the rest of those expectations. So it was not a bad listen by any means, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. But there was an album that just came to my attention, which literally before we recorded, I kind of checked out, what this was all about. There's a band out of Belgium called Entering Polaris, and they came out with a 2 CD release, I guess, within the last week or so. And each CD has its own title, Atlantean Shores, and the second disc is And Silently the Age Did Pass. It's a touch of prog metal, a touch of power metal. It's mixed by Simone Malari from DGM and Michael Romeo, etc. Kind of a mixer master extraordinaire. But check out this lineup of vocalists that he got on this thing. And sometimes you don't even need to hear the music. You just need to see who's playing on it. And then all of a sudden you get curious. Mike Anderson from Cloudscape.
There's a band I haven't heard in a long time. But a very, very good vocalist, in my opinion. Sindre Nederland from In Vain. Thomas Vikstrom from Therion. A guy by the name of Roy Kahn. I think you've heard of him. Henrik Ferber. He's a real new up and comer.
The singer from Anubis Gate. The singer from Subsignal. A guy by the name of Fabio Leone that you may have heard. A guy by the name of Lance King. George Newhouser from Serenity. A Metal Exchange alum, John Yelland. I mean, it is like a crazy, diverse cast of singers on this thing. So I'm going to grab both albums, and I'll let you know how it is. The singers are going to draw me to this thing. I'm extremely curious to hear it.
Yeah, well, we have talked in the past. Like sometimes you see that list of singers, and that it's sometimes difficult to live up to the expectation you build just based on who is involved. So hopefully it lives up to I would say expectations should be lofty based on the names that you just mentioned.
And it will probably fall short, but how do I not give this a listen? It's
sure.
It's one of those things. But before we delve any deeper into what we did listen to, I can tell you, you are a trooper for indulging me with this choice that I picked this week. We are recording over the weekend. On Sunday, I will be going to see this band for the third time live. I saw them twice on 70,000 Tons of Metal back in 2020. And because of the name of the tour, namely the name of this album, I have a feeling that they will play much of it on this U.S. run of shows. And the band is Emperor. And I'm not going to spend the entire time going through the history of this band and black metal, just because it is so crazy that, quite frankly, others have done a much better job than I. I remember watching the documentary, and I think it came out probably 15 years ago, but it's called Until the Light Takes Us All. And it's really a documentary on the rise and fall of black metal in Norway in the 1990s. And obviously Emperor is front and center. I highly recommend watching that. It was a little disturbing, but highly entertaining at the same time. I'll just say that this album came out in 1997, 3 years after their what can otherwise only be described as like a completely revolutionary in many ways debut album, In the Nightside Eclipse. And I have no doubt that the band would have wanted to release material faster, but the guitar player was in prison. I mean, the story is just absolutely batshit crazy. I won't get into it, but while sending demos to one another in prison, in short, Samuth, the guitar player, and Isan, who everybody knows for his vocal work and his guitar work and obviously his songwriting, they're the two masterminds behind this band. And eventually this album comes out on July 8th, 1997. So almost 26 years ago to the day as we talk about this. You've heard the name of the band. We have mutual friends that are big fans. I know I'm going to see one of them, Caleb, at the show on Sunday. Talk to me about like what you knew about this band going into the week, if anything.
I knew that Isan was in Emperor. I didn't know that Emperor had so little recorded material. I was shocked to see that they've only made 4 albums in their history, and it's a band that's so revered as like one of the greatest black metal bands ever. This album is considered possibly the greatest black metal album ever. I will say, if this is the best black metal album ever, I don't know that I'm ever going to be a big fan of black metal.
But you like the dissection. Like, in other words, I'm not saying you were going to go dive into it and go do the whole discography.
Yeah,
there were elements of it that you appreciate.
Yeah, and I can see the appeal. It's just, to me, it's just it's a little bit too chaotic for me. Honestly, the vocals don't really bother me. I think it's impressive that anyone could do that.
Whatever that is.
Yeah, but the music itself wasn't really surprising. It was pretty much what I was expecting. But this really was my first like deep dive into an Emperor album. Although I have listened to many like Isan albums in the past, and I've always been amazed at how good his clean vocals are and how impressive his I don't know if screams would even be the right word for what he does. Like squeals, maybe? I don't know. It's impressive, whatever, that he can open his mouth and that just comes out. It's so guttural and so it's so intense. But it's I do appreciate the symphonic nature of it. It's just not going to be my favorite thing in the world. Although I didn't dislike it, and it's not going to be my lowest ranked album since we started doing this. I'll say that.
The reason, and I appreciate that, let me just say this. There were a couple of things specifically about this album, and there's not only did I choose it because of the tour, but I think you'd have a much more difficult time with their debut, which is also right up there as probably their 2 quote-unquote best albums. I think most would agree. Revolutionary, certainly for the time. But there were elements of this, and I'm going to go through them as we kind of go through the songs that I thought might kind of attract you to this. And I'm wondering if when we talk about it, you will say, you know what, that kind of makes sense, and I'll get there. But
that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that maybe you can explain this better than what my brain was able to take away from it. But I will say I talked to Caleb, and it was his opinion that Prometheus would have been a better diving off point, but that's his opinion, and I didn't listen to it, so I don't know.
And as we get later into their discography, it turns more into like an Isan type of sound, which is, dare I say, slightly more accessible than even this. This is chaotic. There's no question about it. There are blast beats all over the place. And I have to say, the drumming on this album, and the drummer's name is Trim, is nothing short of incredible, just because how the hell do you do that for, and again, I know it's broken up in the studio, but it's basically 43 minutes of an in-your-face assault. The bass player, Alvar, you can barely hear on the thing, but it's the Isan and Samuth show with the drums behind it for all intents and purposes. There are heavy uses of orchestration here, and I thought that might be one of the things that kind of stuck out. But also, there are breaks in the action before they kind of go full throttle again, which help at least break up the monotony of that chaotic or franticness. Now, I don't know that it makes it any less. I don't know that it makes the rest more palatable, but at least there are breaks in the action here and there. Because if it was 43 minutes of the same thing, I could understand why this would not be anyone's cup of tea, if that makes sense.
Yes, I agree. And also, like, I think without the symphonic elements, it would have been a lot more difficult to digest or enjoy for me. I think that kind of at least made it a little bit more enjoyable. But to me, like, 85 to 90% of this album is what I would call if anxiety had a soundtrack.
Would you say that it was indiscernible from one another?
I'd say a lot of the songs to me sounded kind of the same, although there is one that I'm going to choose for my song of the week that I thought stuck out in its difference from the rest.
I bet I can name what it is, and when we get there, I'll name it.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. But in general, it's just, to me, just like this, just fast-paced. Just like you said, I feel like the drums are really the kind of the most prominent part of this, because it's just like this drum, like, destruction, just fast, just this. I mean, it's really impressive stuff. And then just fast guitar riffs with Isan just screaming. Like, it's just chaotic and a little bit scary. And if you played this for me at the time that it came out, which incidentally was like right around the time that I started listening to metal, and a little peek behind the curtain, we're going to talk about that first mixtape that Ralph made for me and that I shared with the rest of our group of friends that kind of started the whole, metal obsession for us. That's going to be a bonus episode before the end of the month, and we're hoping that Ralph will actually join us too. We're gonna like read off the names of the songs that he chose, which I promise he will not remember. He has a admittedly horrible memory, so it'll be fun. But anyway, if I had heard this at that time, I think the chances of me getting into metal would have decreased exponentially.
Well, I get that. I get that. It makes complete sense. We'll talk, I guess, at the end about some of the accolades this album has received, but I just want to jump into it. And typically, I don't spend a lot of time on intro tracks. I really don't. We usually kind of gloss over it and get into the meat and potatoes of the album. But I think that this one is so different in so many ways. I'll be completely honest with you. The starting track, and I'm going to butcher this, Alstar the Oath, better known as just The Oath, is a 4-minute and 18-second intro that, if I'm being honest with you, is one of my all-time favorite lead-in tracks on any album. And I'm going to explain why. It starts off so upbeat and almost like you're taking this stroll through a beautiful forest, and then it gets so dark so quickly. And I just love the dichotomy, because it really is almost preparing you for the next 38 minutes of this album, because the way they almost had the foresight, like, we're going to start it off one way and then it's just going to turn evil and wicked and dark. And it reminded me in certain ways of The More by Opeth, which is their debut or the first song on Still Life, one of their best albums, and how it kind of just progressively gets dark at the beginning of that song. But the difference is the way that the music here is just blending in with the guitar, the sound effects and the guitar tones. It is just a perfect prelude in my mind. And I just wanted to know if you could appreciate like that dichotomy between like the good and the evil that this would ultimately turn into for the next 7 or 8 tracks.
Yeah, I mean, it was like you said, it was like a nice stroll through a forest, and then someone came in and lit the forest on fire.
Which is pretty much what they would do at the time, which is why, and needless to say, a lot of these guys wound up in prison. So I get it. And usually it wasn't forest, but the church is in the forest. But I mean, you got a little bit of everything here. You got fake trumpets. You got like it's I don't know. I love it. I just think it's a great intro track. And then we get into the first proper track, easily considered one of their best songs, Yea and Transperium. This was one of the few songs that not only did Ihsahn and Sameth write, and they wrote the bulk of this album. They really wrote all of it, but they actually gave writing credits to Euronymous, which I thought was really, really interesting. And for those that don't know who that is, he was the guitar player from Mayhem, who's one of the black metal pioneers, who was murdered 3 years before this album came out. But because it was his riff and they basically just took it, they actually gave him writing credits post-mortem, which I thought was a very nice gesture, all things considered.
These black metal guys sure can be classy. I mean, I was shocked. I actually dug into some of this and found out that he was murdered by his own bandmate or former bandmate, which is crazy. I probably know even less about Mayhem than I do about Emperor, but that's a wild. That sounds like a real wild story.
It is, and I'll go back to Until the Light Takes Us All. It's all in that documentary. It's definitely worth watching. But I got to be honest with you. The one thing that Emperor did a little bit differently than some of the predecessors like Mayhem, it didn't sound like it was recorded on a 4-track. Now, I'll admit, I did listen to the remastered version. That's the version of the album I have. It has 3 bonus tracks on it, but I think that it sounds better than a lot of the stuff that was coming out in the early 90s, like bands like Mayhem, which just sounded like garbage. And it was almost like they wore it as a badge of honor. The worse it sounded on a 4-track, the more they wanted to put it out. Interesting.
This is the kind of stuff that I was hoping to learn from you because, this is really not my milieu. So, I was hoping that I would at least learn a few things, and so far I am.
So to that end, we kind of leave the forest and we go into this second track, which can really just be described as nothing more than like a brutal assault on the senses. I mean, this thing is basically, when you think of symphonic black metal, this is it. And there's no punches. I mean, this thing punches you in the face from the first note. Blast beats all over the place, and then that fucking scream that Ihsahn lets out to start off this song. I mean, it's nothing short of incredible. I can't wait to hear this song live again. And that riff, I mean, I know it was borrowed or stolen or what have you, but it's just a powerful, powerful riff. And the song is just so fast and heavy. But for me, and maybe this is because I've listened to this album for years now, oddly melodic. And I think that some of his solo material, especially his early solo material, reminds me a lot of a better produced version of a song like this. And I think that the keyboards kind of help accentuate the melody despite the chaos. Did that help you at all? Did the keyboards kind of reel you in or kind of ground you, or was it just so chaotic that it was hard to appreciate?
It's somewhere in between those things, maybe. Okay. I don't think it was hard to appreciate. It was just a lot. But I do know that this is a song that Ihsahn has played as part of his solo act, so that what you said might have rung true for him. That it kind of fits his more of it like what his solo material is. But to me, this felt fairly similar to the preceding track.
Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have much else to say about it. But
I'll just say one thing. There's in the middle of this song, there's this like riff and keyboard combo, and every time I hear it, I think of the Wizard of Oz, where they're like assaulting the castle, and I don't know why, but I can't like separate the two. I do like how it also slows down during the bridge, and you get some cleans here, which is not something I recall hearing on their debut, and I've listened. It's been a couple of years since I've listened to it. But
if they played this song in the Wizard of Oz, those flying monkeys would have been even more terrifying.
I'm with you. I knew that this would be a harder song to kind of come around on, and although it's a song of the week candidate for me, I went in a different direction. And it leads into the next track, which is, I believe, the one track you might have known from the album, "Thus Spake the Night Spirit." Did you know this track?
Sort of. I think again, I think this was one of the songs that Isan played on his solo tour. So I think I've listened to it in anticipation of seeing Isan, which I didn't end up doing. But yeah, it is what it is. I don't know. It's kind of, I feel like it was similar to
the prior.
Yeah, like it just more brutality.
The difference is, at least for me, and again, I'll only speak for myself, whereas the first song is really just this onslaught for like the better part of 5 minutes. This one, I think, is a little bit shorter and almost like a dark march to death. And I know that that's really going to attract people to listening to this. But I think that intro with the trumpet, really cool. I love it. And you kind of like juxtapose that with the fact that that first vocal line here, again, absolutely terrifying. But again, for black metal, very, very melodic. I do hear in the guitar solos especially, they have this, for lack of a better term, I hear it as like Merciful Fate worship. And we covered Merciful Fate in the archives. I don't know if you can hear that in the guitar work, but I think between that guitar tone and the drums that really drive this thing around, I think that this is a really good tune. And I think it's one that, if I'm not mistaken, they may have even did they do a video for this song? If I'm not mistaken, I feel like this might have been something they, no, I guess not. But like, I think it could have been a video, for in that little dark metal, that black metal circle. I don't know that it was going to be on MTV, but I think that they could have easily done a video for this song.
I think they did a video for The Loss and Curse of Reverence, according to Wikipedia. So I don't know if they did any more than that, but
fairly certain that was the only one.
Yeah, I didn't know "spake" was a word until I heard this song, so that's something new I learned. So yeah, that's pretty much my takeaway. I found that this and Ye and Trans Imperium. God, did I say that right?
I think you did. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I just found that both of them were, to me, fairly similar and just equally as intense and brutal as one another.
Fair enough.
And again, like I actually do see what the appeal of this band is. I think I would personally enjoy it a lot more live after a few drinks. I feel like that would.
Well, I've got something to tell you.
Enjoy that more.
I think I have an extra ticket for Sunday, so if you'll indulge me, I'll buy the beer and you could enjoy the show. No, but kidding aside, I think it is definitely a sight and sound to behold live. I can definitely.
Well, I also think seeing the people in the crowd is part of the excitement too. I'm sure, like. I can't imagine there isn't some semblance of moshing and crowd surfing and just complete mania.
So it's funny you mentioned that. They're playing at a venue in New York City, in Brooklyn, called the King's Theater. And it's a beautiful theater. It's all seats. There's no floor. There will be no moshing at this show. In fact, everyone will be, it's crazy. I thought that they would play a big, kind of ballroom, but it's not. It's a theater. and it's think of it as like a mini Radio City Music Hall. It is an absolute.
Well, at least you won't have to fear for your life if you decide to get too close.
There you go. And although ironically, the room holds 3,000 people, so I don't know how. I mean, that is a large crowd if they manage to pull this off. But
is it sold out or close to it, or do we know?
I don't know. I can certainly get back to you. I know that tickets were not cheap. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, that's what Caleb had said too. Interesting. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about it after it's over.
You will get my full review. I think that as we kind of get back into the album for a second, my thoughts when bands spell things the wrong way. It is like a pet peeve of mine. And Emperor does that. And it's funny because you think with a black metal band, they wouldn't go into, I mean, there's enough gimmicks. They don't need to be spelling chaos with a K, but alas, here we are, ensorcelled by chaos with a K. This is a very raw song. It's a very cold song. A touch slower, I think, than the songs that precede it, but it is, in my opinion, more frenetic than the prior two. The keyboards are so chaotic that they almost feel like they're playing a completely different song than the rest of the band. It is like night and day, like between those two. And I do like how about a minute and a half into the song, it turns kind of theatrical in a way and almost like more focused. And I actually prefer that style because I think that you can retain the core of the black metal, but without like being completely chaotic. I think that the instrumental section here is very, very haunting. And, it's almost like you're going through a haunted house in many ways. The double bass drum here is just a little exhausting at this point. And although I think it's a decent song, it's probably my least favorite on the album. And I'm wondering if you could, was it more chaotic than the songs prior, or is it just me?
It was less chaotic with a K. I actually, not counting the intro, this is my favorite song thus far. I actually like it better than the previous two because I feel like it slows. I think it slows down a little bit.
It does.
It brings it down to more of a medium pace, which I appreciate. I think the orchestrations and the keyboards kind of give it a little bit more of a palatable flavor for me. And while like it does get chaotic again towards the end, I just thought it was a little bit easier to digest than the previous two tracks. I will give the Chaos with a K a little bit of a pass because if you ever watched Get Smart, which I did when I was a kid on Nick at Night, the criminal organization Chaos was spelled Kaos. So I'm willing to give that one a pass. But I think that to sum this one up in the words of Pat Gravino, keep ensorceling.
I can appreciate the slowing down and why that might appeal to you. That brings us to the quote unquote single. It had actually been released, I think, as an EP or as a single a few months before the album came out. And the song, of course, is called The Loss and Curse of Reverence. I have never seen an Emperor music video. I really will be posting it this week. I'll just say this. This is my song of the week. I don't know that it's my favorite song, but it's the song that jumped out to me the most this week. Has it been on one of your power hours yet?
Mine, I don't think I've ever used an Emperor video, but I know Caleb must have. I'm actually looking to see. I'm running a search through the power. He's used one Emperor video for the song "Empty," and that's it. That's the. I also used a Leverage song called Emperor.
There you go. Yeah, that sounds like a missed opportunity. I want to share my thoughts on this song, but before I do, let's give The Loss and Curse of Reverence a listen. I think that this song starts off not at 100 miles an hour, but possibly at 1,000 miles an hour with this really interesting riff and sound effect combo. But what I think the orchestration on arguably on this track more than any other pops so much and just kind of helps separate this tune from the one that preceded it. Midway through, there's this like folky passage, which I never really expected, but it almost reminds you of like a dark circus in many ways. And I think it just helps break up the onslaught very, very nicely. And then, of course, they come back with a vengeance with this, out of control guitar solo. I just think this is a really memorable track on a very, very good album if you're into this sort of thing.
I like this song more than the
first two.
Yeah, not counting the intro. I don't know what it is about it. It felt maybe slightly less insane, and just a little bit easier to kind of comprehend. Or maybe I'm just getting used to it as I'm getting deeper into the album. But this is not a bad tune by any stretch. I do really, like I mentioned before, I appreciate the little touches of keyboards and orchestrations and stuff that kind of keeps a little bit of a symphonic kind of vibe, that it's not just straight up black metal that I think I just would out and out not enjoy.
And I think that makes sense why this track was a little more enjoyable for you. I'm wondering if the acclamation of Bonds gives you that same type of feeling, because here the intro is slowed down quite a bit, and I think that's a phenomenal contrast. It feels like they're building to something on this song, and then sure enough, in your face, melodic, keyboard-laden tune, but like there's a lot of progginess on this track, and I think it's because of some of the more diverse drum beats and some of the odd time signatures that they use. But in a way, it almost adds to the charm of this track. I think it's one of the most underrated, maybe the most underrated on the album. Obviously, Isan sounds like a man possessed here, and I think that's to be expected at this point. But these bells kick in all out of nowhere, and it's almost like they just go into "For Whom the Bell Tolls" out of nowhere, even between not only the keyboards but the riff itself, and then they go back into the chaos. But something about this track, I don't think it gets the love that it otherwise should on an album that, I think people usually gravitate towards other songs.
I definitely got that Metallica vibe as well. I mean, again, I think it kind of goes. It's kind of in that same vein as these just real faster, heavier, chaotic tunes. But I thought the song was pretty good too. I kind of put it in the same realm as the previous song.
So it sounds like it starts off a little difficult for you to swallow, or just kind of hard as you ease yourself in. But it seems like the last 2 or 3 tracks you've been more, I don't know, just like it seems like it's picking up a little bit steam for you as we get towards the back end of the album.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's just that like it was like too much too quickly when the album started. You have like this really kind of spooky but fairly mellow intro, and then it just explodes and it's very jarring, especially if it's not like your style of music. But I think I'm kind of like settling in now, and it's just kind of like I know what to expect. I don't think anything's going to surprise me. I mean, really, just after Ye and Trans Imperium, I mean, I don't know that there's really anything that should be surprising after that track. Like
fair.
Like they pretty much set the tone right from the get go. But again, this is another solid tune. I would argue that if you're not going to have an acclamation of Bonds, you should at least have an honorific of Stocks.
I like that. As we get towards the last full-length track on the album, and by full-length, I mean like the last, I don't know, like the last real song on the album, With Strength I Burn. This is like the epic on the album. It's over 8 minutes and 15 seconds long. And yet, my prediction is that it winds up being your song of the week, which is just really bizarre. Am I right or am I off?
You are right. Although, to be honest with you, up until today, my song of the week was going to be the instrumental bonus track.
I had a feeling you were thinking that. Why?
Go ahead.
What? So I have my reasons as to why I thought you might like this track, and it's just, again, it's interesting because when you think about it, it's 20% of the album in terms of length. But tell me why with Strength I Burn is your track of the week.
A couple of things. I mean, first of all, there's just easily the most prevalence of clean vocals on the album, which is fine. I actually don't think the clean vocals are that great. It's just I think that they're kind of a welcome change after this, 40 minutes or so, or however long it's been, 30 minutes or so of just brutal screaming. But I also just think that the pace and the gait of the song, it's again kind of harkening back to Ensorcelled by Chaos. It's a little bit more on that kind of tempo, and it even kind of slows down a bit in the middle. And because it's longer, it has more, I think, more parts to it to kind of make have different parts that stick out. So to me, oddly enough, I would have probably been surprised to say that I didn't even realize this was by far the longest track. Like it really kind of moved at a nice pace. I don't know. I just kind of liked it. And it really hit me today. I listened to this album 6 times, and every time I'm just kind of hoping that something would just click with me. I've listened to it on headphones. I've listened to it in the car. I've listened to it while working. I've listened to it while playing Grand Theft Auto. It's very dense, and it's just a lot to take in. And I think I really wanted to, we would have probably recorded sooner, but I just really wanted to make sure. I think I just hit a wall, and I was like, this is as far as I'm going to get. And I don't know that listening to it another 5 times would have made much more of a difference. But if you were going to ask me to listen to a song from this album, in the future, I would most definitely choose this one.
I like it. Let's give it a listen, and then when we come back, I'll share my thoughts. This is a very, very ambitious tune for a black metal band. It's not my favorite on the album, but I do like it quite a bit. And it reminds me of something that Arcturus was doing around the same time, which quite frankly is the Sham Mirrors by Arcturus, which is another album I think we should cover down the line, is the first black metal album I ever purchased. And I purchased it, I think when we were in high school, which is just goes to show you. I had it in my collection, and I would always go back to it, and I just never quite got it. But I think I'd appreciate it a lot more now for sure. As you said, definitely a liberal use of cleans. And there was stuff that would, although I'll say this, as good as the cleans are, I think his vocals got much better over the years. This is a very young,
absolutely
raw Isan. It's interesting. Around 3 minutes and 45 seconds in, the song slows down, and I actually got a Rhapsody vibe. Of all bands, I got a Rhapsody vibe, which, ironically, their debut was coming out the same year, but I have no doubt that the two have nothing to do with one another, but that's what it reminded me of. And I thought that they were experimenting here, but it kept it fresh in many ways. 2 minutes later, it would just get super heavy with these brutal riffs and these, before the rest of the band chimes in again.
It was a good way to break things up too, because, I think 8 minutes of just the 8 minutes of "Thus Spake the Night Spirit" would just like your head would explode.
Yeah, and then it ends. It's essentially, like I said, the last song, which is kind of a cool way to end it before the Wanderer, which is this slow instrumental
Not
outro.
the cover of Dion and the Belmonts.
No, not at all. But it's this slow instrumental outro, which is like kind of like the cookie that, you know, think of it as an Oreo with that intro, that's 4-minute intro, and then this Wanderer outro. The album's really like a big cookie when you think about it. And what color are Oreos? Black and white. So, I mean, it just makes complete sense to me. But it lets you kind of take a breather and just appreciate everything that came before it, because I think that if they would have went out like 1,000 miles an hour, it would have definitely lost something. But because they went in and out a little bit slower, it helped everything in the middle kind of marinate, if you will, until we get to the end of this album.
Yeah, I like this outro. I feel like if this was an completely instrumental album, I think that it would be a little bit less overwhelming. But I just think when you throw on those crazy Isan screams on top of the wild guitar and the thundering drums, it's so overwhelming that, like, I feel like if you took out any one of those three elements, it might be a little bit more palatable. And I think that this track, while it's more of a kind of a mid-tempo kind of song, it kind of shows that, like, there is a lot of musicianship here. It's not just chaos for the sake of chaos. So a really cool outro, and I think it fits really well at the end of the "With Strength I Burn" tune to kind of finish off with that.
I may very well pick Prometheus at some point. Not soon, but at some point, because there are a lot of the elements that you seem to be enjoying from this album is very prevalent on Prometheus. So that might just be the album that you need to kind of get you over the hump with these guys. Just kind of my thoughts. I'll just say a few words about two of the bonus tracks. The first being "In Longing Spirit." I have no idea why this is a bonus track. I actually like this track a lot. Although, to be fair, I don't know where it would have been placed on the album proper, because it really doesn't belong anywhere. And I think that it would have broken up the flow in many ways if you just stuck it in the middle of the album. But this is very much in line with his solo material that would come out years later, obviously. But I do think this is a really good song, and it's a little more theatrical and a little less black metal. And I have a feeling that it was probably something that was easily digestible for you, and probably something you liked quite a bit.
Yeah, it was good. A little bit, again, like another more of a generally mid-tempo kind of song, which I just seem to have enjoyed more than the more fast, which is funny because I'm usually a faster, like I like fast music generally, but I think when it comes to black metal, it's almost like too much. And so like I kind of like it when they like bring it down a notch, and I can kind of take it in without feeling overwhelmed. And I think this is another track that kind of falls under that that category. I mean, for me, like I would say "Ensorcelled by Chaos," "With Strength I Burn," and probably this "In Longing Spirit" were probably my three favorite songs on the album, and they were probably three of the slowest songs on the album if you don't count the intro and the outro.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. The other bonus track is called "Opus A Satana," which is essentially an orchestral version of "Inno A Satana" from their debut album, which I spoke about earlier, "In the Nightside Eclipse." No vocals on this one, very different sound than the song on the debut, but a kind of a cool instrumental rendition of one of their, if not their most famous song from that debut album.
Yeah, I like this a lot, actually. It makes me wonder if you strip down this whole album and all the songs, made versions of all these songs that like in this orchestral kind of way, like I feel like it would just, first of all, it probably would sound like almost unrecognizable, but also I think you'd really appreciate the musicianship and just like the really good just music writing that was done here that I think maybe gets lost in the chaos.
Well, to that end, I think you need to make a deeper dive into his Isan solo material, because if you appreciate the songwriting for what it is on a track like this, you're going to eat up a lot of his solo material. And I know you probably have exposure to some of it, but like,
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed his most recent EP. There was one track from it that, if it's not on a playlist that I've put out yet, it will be, that I really, really liked. So yeah, I am a fan of certain things that Isan does. But yeah, to be honest, I don't know that I know any of his albums start to finish all that well. But I will say I really did. It's actually in contention for my EP of the year, if you can believe that.
No kidding. I was
not that there was like a ton of competition, but I just really enjoyed all three songs.
That's great. Scale of 1 to 10. What are you rating this album?
I was struggling, and it kind of slowly went from like a 5, and it reached about a 6.5, which is where I'm gonna land. It's a slightly higher than what I gave the Dissection album. I believe I gave that one a 6. In all honesty, I don't really even remember it that well, but the stuff that I liked, I really liked. It's just it was just like the experience was generally overwhelming. But I again, I see the appeal. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but I didn't dislike it at all. I thought it was slightly above average.
I want to first thank you for taking the time to go down this rabbit hole with me, because
never again.
Yeah, I know it was not the easiest thing to digest, but I'll say this: the fact that it did go up a point or a point and a half is telling that I think if you spend time with it, you can get to an average score, or a slightly around an average score, which I think is very, very impressive. Number two, I will say that for my money, I think this is probably the best black metal album I've ever heard. That being said, I can't listen to it twice in a row. I would drive in other words, in small doses, I love it. And then I can't listen to it for a while. But then I go back to it and I just absolutely adore it. So for me, it's actually like an 8.25, which is probably the highest score that I'll ever give a black metal album, because it's just not my cup of tea. But an 8.25 is, I think, where it needs to be, because it is. I think there's some brilliance on here, and I truly enjoy this album, and I hope that they play at least half, if not more of it, on Sunday when I go see them, which will be the day before this podcast is released for most people that are not on our Patreon. So that's my score. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to it with me, and I think we'll have something that you like a little bit better next week, because it was a Patreon request and we know what it is. But before we get there, I want to just mention a couple of news items. The first, Ice Age out at Prague Power, The Reticent has been named as their replacement. They're a band out of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Woo!
Yeah, Ric Flair country. I don't know if you've ever heard of these guys. They have a really interesting sound. It's like prog metal, prog rock with a touch of alt rock. I actually think you might like them quite a bit. But I just wanted to mention them because they are in the fold. They came out with, I think they have 3 or 4 albums at this point. They've been around for close to 20 years.
Yeah, I remember hearing of them, but I'm not really super familiar. I have one of their older albums from like 11 years ago. I didn't realize that they'd been around as long as they have, but I'll give them a listen. I'll be honest with you, man. I really dug the new Ice Age album, and I was kind of interested to see how they would be live. I was kind of shocked at how much I enjoyed the album, especially my predilection for prog not being quite what yours is, but I thought it was a really good album, and it was disappointing to hear that they aren't going to play. But I know there's a lot of people that really like The Reticent, so good for them for getting on the lineup, and they'll be opening up Wednesday night, so that should be good.
Nice. I agree with that. I will say this. Transitioning to bands that did not get as high a score as Emperor, Anthrax, John Bush has said that he would really like to celebrate the end of, or I should say his era in Anthrax, that it's, quote, something I would like to do before I die, Would you have any interest in seeing Anthrax if John Bush was fronting them for a tour or two?
I would watch John Bush sing opera if the opportunity arose. I think he's just a wonderful vocalist and
And a
a hell
great
of a.
front man.
Oh my God! Just the energy he brings to a live setting is really impressive. I like him a lot. I definitely would like to do an episode about a Bush era Anthrax album. I don't know that it's the vocals that I particularly didn't love about the album we did talk about, but I'd be curious to hear it. Plus, it would probably be a little bit more modern than the album we heard. But yeah, I mean, I would check out. I would check that out. It would be interesting to see if that was something they would be willing to do live. But yeah, that would be very cool.
I would love to see it. I think that when he sings live, he's one of the most powerful singers I've ever heard live. And no spring chicken, but he still is able to bring it live like no other. And I think that that's really just, quite frankly, I think that he makes Armored Saint a good band, fantastic, just because of his presence and the power behind his vocals. So very, very, very cool stuff. And then
we're due for an Armored Saint episode too. I would say
absolutely. I actually almost picked Symbol of Salvation about 6 times, but I wind up picking other things. But in due time. And then just one other little bit of news for the Lacuna Coil fans. Don't hold your breath. The new album is not coming this year. It's looking like 2024 for their next album. That's another band which the reason I bring this up as a news item is because their sound in many ways I think is a big influence on the band that we are going to do next week. I feel like without Lacuna Coil, this other band may not have the sound that they do. You want to tell everyone what it is we're covering next week?
Absolutely. We have this was a request from one of our patrons, Amy, who wanted us to go to do an Ad Infinitum album, and since she couldn't pick one, she picked all 3. So we're going to talk about all 3 albums. Also, in preparation and ahead of their performance at Prague Power, which I believe will be their U.S. debut. Is there a tour surrounding this, or if so, has it been announced yet?
I know Melissa Bonney, the singer, has done a number of tours at this point. That she was on 70,000 Tons last year, and she's touring with Camelot for their U.S. tour. But as far as I know, this is Ad Infinitum's first U.S. show, which is surprising to me because I feel like at this point they're on the precipice of really blowing up. So good for them.
Well, I think this is going to be the first of many. Kind of has that same kind of feeling that we had when like Sabaton played at Prague Power for the first time, where it was like this band's about to blow up, and in this country, I think it's just it was just a matter of time. So these are 3 albums that I just know for a fact that I enjoy quite a bit. So I'm looking forward to revisiting them and seeing how they stack up against one another. But this is going to be our first of a few Prague Power themed episodes that we're going to have leading into the festival. That is just a little over 2 months away at this point. It's unbelievable to think that. So we have a special interview planned, at least one more career retrospective, maybe 2. But as we tend to do, we're going to do our prep work via this podcast. So it just turns out that Amy made the decision a little bit easier for us. So I hope that this doesn't lead to more people requesting career retrospectives, but this one I think is a pretty low maintenance choice. So
as long as we don't get that Rush career retrospective where we have to listen to 30 not that I don't love Rush, but I'm not sitting there listening to 30 albums 10 times in a week. It's just not going to happen.
Well, it'll be like 3 months of episodes pretty much. It's like it's Rush season here at the Metal Exchange. So for
we
all
do 4 albums a week, and it still takes 3 months.
For all of the spring, we'll be talking about Rush, which I'm sure our mutual friend Christina would love. But neither here nor there. There's definitely there's some Rush albums I definitely would like to go back to, particularly the the early '80s time, like
Moving
the
pictures.
Signals and the Grace Under Pressure kind of era, where they kind of embraced their '80s-ness with like taking the wonderful Rush sound and getting that keyboard, that kind of new wave kind of keyboard vibe. I mean, Subdivisions and Distant Early Warning are two of my favorite songs by any band of all time. So I'm very curious about a lot of these other songs that I'm not as familiar with. But it's so interesting because this band has so many like stylistic eras. So there's a little sidebar there, but yeah, looking forward to this Ad Infinitum, and I'm really stoked to see them live at Prague Power. I know that we are both sponsoring the band, so they obviously have been on our radar for a while, and now looks like we'll get to see them live, and I'm super pumped for that.
Well said. Well said. If you like what you hear, give us a like and a follow. It helps other people find the show. Shout out to all our new patrons. We really appreciate the support. If there's anything that you want to hear us cover, join the Patreon. Send us a request. We have a list that is ever growing, and we are going to make a point to get to each and every one of them at some point, and we'll probably even double up certain months in order to make sure we get through everything. So send us a request. We will get to them. And like I said,
speaking of that, of which, why don't you share what we have planned for Monday?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we have our monthly group Patreon chat this Monday. We're looking forward to that immensely. It'll be if you are a Patreon, you are welcome to join the chat. It is a way for us to connect with everyone, talk about what we've been listening to, talk about what we didn't like. We try not to slander too many people here, but we get a little more candid in there as to some of the stuff that maybe just didn't click for us. And we come one, come all. It'll be a good time. I assure you.
Yeah.
That.
Well, we've opened up the chat to. It originally was only for our top tier members. We've opened it up to our top 2 tiers. So hopefully we have a bit of a bigger group to chat. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm glad that we'll have a couple of new faces, and we've also had a couple of new patrons since our last chat. So this will be our third one, but I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, before the end of the month, we'll have a new a chat on Monday, a new bonus episode. And then we'll open up July with the Ad Infinitum career retrospective. So lots to look forward to in the next week or so.
I like it a lot. Enjoy the week, my friend, and happy listening. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care, buddy.